You could study all the fantastic case studies of Spotify and Amazon. But at the end of the day, you're not Spotify, you're not Amazon. And so, great, those things might have worked for those companies, but it's not working for you. And so,
You talk about what are the different leadership skills that you focus on, and what do you guys specifically do to coach people in that area?
So I think when it comes to the skills, I think one is to really understand where you are, at what level you are, and then identify what are some of the skills and competencies that is keeping you stuck from that next level.
What are the most critical factors of driving innovation within product teams, right?
What does innovation mean? Does innovation mean building something completely new? Does innovation mean changing how you work and collaborate? When I proposed that strategy, of course, it got shut down.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast, Everything Product. In this podcast, we talk about different product management concepts, latest technology insights, and we also host a wide variety of guests shaping up the technology industry. Today, we have got an absolutely eye-opening episode for you. We just wrapped up an incredible conversation with Bosky Mukherjee, and let me tell you, it's one you wouldn't want to miss. You know, right? We often hear about the importance of diversity in tech, but today we are diving deep into the real day-to-day challenges that women face in product leadership roles. Bosky isn't just talking the talk; she's walking the walk as a passionate advocate of women in product management. In this episode, we tackle the juggling act that so many women navigate daily. We are talking about balancing high-stakes product decisions with personal responsibilities and how women are crushing it despite the odds. To talk a little bit more about Bosky, Bosky is a CEO of PM Dojo. She's a product leadership coach, and she's someone who is making huge waves when it comes to empowering women in tech and product leadership. She's held several leadership roles in companies like Atlassian, and now through PM Dojo, she is helping women break barriers and step into the executive roles with confidence. Bosky, it's awesome to have you here. We have got a lot to talk about today. Starting from your journey, your leadership philosophy, and of course, how you're helping women in tech really own the room. Before we dive all into that, thank you so much for taking time and joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Really looking forward to having this conversation. Let's get to it.
Awesome. Let's start with a very simple one, right? I've always been impressed with your incredible journey. You've started as a PM, grown towards a peer product leader, and then took a step back, understood your strengths, and then started your own company. And now you're helping hundreds of people in the industry to get into product. So, can you start with what inspired you to make this shift? Like, why from a product leader to starting your own company and helping the people and stuff?
So I actually started in tech support, but in that little teeny tiny company, and the reason why I took the job was I needed something to keep my visa status. We all know the immigrant story. So as an international student, I needed something to keep a job and pay my rent and hopefully send some money home that could pay the extensive loan that my parents had taken. But within 3 months, I did move into a product role within the same startup. So that is the actual story. But I think for me, the shift to move out of product and get into my own thing, I think the reason for that is over the years, I had gotten really frustrated with a few things. Number one, I was mentoring a lot of people. I was helping out a lot of folks who were either interested to get into product or who were already in product but wanted to kind of move up into leadership roles. And every single time, it basically came down to a couple of patterns that I was seeing. Everybody took courses, the most popular ones that you can find, if you were to Google. And every single time, they got a really good understanding of the theoretical side of product management, but the reality was very different, right? So the real world is messy. You're working with people. Oftentimes, it's not about a framework that's going to get you a buy-in or going to help you win a business case or deal with all of the drama that happens when you're building products. And they just couldn't handle that. And so, of course, if they were trying to transition into product, they were kind of failing face flat. not being able to translate because it's so easy to talk about all the theory behind product building. And then the same thing was happening for folks who were already in product and they were trying to kind of position themselves for a higher role, whether it was a director product or a VP. You could study all the fantastic case studies of Spotify and Amazon, but at the end of the day, you're not Spotify, you're not Amazon. So that context is missing. And so great, those things might have worked for those companies, but it's not working for you. And so a lot of people were getting frustrated. We're like, well, I am finding myself in situations, but that's not how it's supposed to be. I've read this book and I've read that book. And people were somehow stuck between the idealistic view of product management, product leadership, and what the messy reality is. So that was, I think, one big contributing factor that I wanted to kind of do something because there was nothing being done. And I think the second thing was I was just frustrated with every company talking about wanting to hire more women, wanting to promote more women, but contributing their inability to do so on pipeline problem. And if I look around myself, there is no pipeline problem. If I look around in the companies, there's no pipeline problem. So what is the problem? And so I wanted to do something to solve those two issues. And I realized that I could keep on joining a company as a VP of product or a chief product officer. I could bring about changes one company at a time, but maybe I was greedy and I wanted to make the change at a scale. And I didn't believe I could wait 2 years, 3 years, one company at a time to make the change. And as I said, okay, I'm going to try to do it at in a way where I can make a bigger impact. And that's what prompted me to leave the corporate and then venture into starting my own.
Nice.
If I may ask, I have a quick question. So could you maybe talk more about the pipeline problem which you are mentioning?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of companies, at least back in the day, I don't hear so much of a pipeline problem right now, but it is still talked about. Essentially, the pipeline problem means we don't have that many women. So how are we going to hire? Or there are not that many women candidates. We don't get that many women to apply. Or we don't get that many women to promote. Most of them are leaving the workforce. So really, it's a pipeline problem. Sure, a little bit of that is fact. There is science, there is data. I'm not going to debate around that. That's just the fact, unfortunately. However, there are a lot of things that companies can do, right? One is like if you're thinking about just promoting, you have to, I think, ask why are women leaving? Are you trying to make it really hard for women to actually succeed, right? So, just think about mothers as an example. Any new mom, especially in the US, if you think about the mat leave, the maternity leave, makes it really hard for women to leave a little one if you don't have family support to just come back to work, right? I mean, 12 weeks, 16 weeks is nothing. Or if you think about, lactation rooms, if you think about how do you design jobs, are you trying to make it easier for women to maybe gradually ease in to their role? Are you thinking of supporting them? And then, of course, there are structural things that are happening in companies as well. I think tech is very much still a bro culture. That's just one example. So there are a lot of things that companies can do. There are a lot of things government policies can do, but there are a lot of other things I think that are just there. But I think we just club it around a pipeline problem because it's so easy to say, it's not my problem.
Correct.
It's, we just don't have that many women. But I don't believe that with whatever women you have, I think we should be having a lot more women in tech and a lot more women in leadership roles.
That makes sense. Actually, I want to understand, just for audience to understand, right? Can you give a little bit more about what is PM Dojo and what are you trying to do to help the community?
What am I think initially 6 years ago almost, the name was like I wanted to build a very safe space where people in product could get hands-on learning regardless of where they were in their product journey in a very to basically master their craft. I hold a lot of sanctity to product building. Maybe I'm old school, I don't know. But for me, it's a very sacred thing to be building products, to be actually doing good and making that impact. And for me, I think coming from that Japanese culture, I think dojo just means that sacred place where you can learn from some really good, smart people, some kind people, but at the same time, it's most importantly, it's a place where you can really hone your craft and get better and better and better. So I think that's why maybe my husband bought the domain and we just got stuck with the name. But essentially, PM Dojo has two programs. One is to help folks transition into product. And essentially what we do is we have a product accelerator program. We were the first one to actually launch a product accelerator program. After this, I think the word accelerator just became like, just everyone started using accelerator for every single program of theirs. So I try not to get mad at that. I'm like, okay, it just kind of proves the point that this name means something. But essentially, the Product Accelerator is a unique experiential program where we mimic what happens in the real world, where you get to learn, but you also get to do and step into a PM role. So you're working with a cross-functional team and you go through all of the stages in a total how creative work happens in the companies, but you're working with a designer, developer, and a cross-functional team, and you end up actually launching a live product in 10 weeks. You are not only just launching, it's fairly easy to build things these days, but you're also learning how to decide North Star metrics, you're learning how to validate, you're learning how to interview users, you're learning how to think about strategy and roadmap, and you're pivoting and iterating based on data and evidence. And you're also building the human skills or the soft skills along the way. So that's another gap in a lot of PM courses. You basically don't learn any of the human skills, you're just learning frameworks. And essentially that is not what prepares you for a job. And we have tons of career support and lifelong community. So that is one program which helps career transitioners. And then there is another program which is called the Product Leadership Edge. And that program is specifically for women product managers. And so that program essentially helps women PMs at different levels to get the skills as well as habits, mindsets, as well as human skills and hard skills, so that they can be not just good, but they can really be one of the best in as a product leader, and they can move up into leadership roles. It has both a one-on-one format where they get to work with me one-on-one. It also has a group format where maybe some folks may want to learn better or they learn better in a peer group setting. But again, it is facilitated with me, but you're actually learning, you're applying, and you're actually getting those mindsets and the skills to move up. I think there is a lot of talk around, well, just learn how to advocate for yourself and you're going to get promoted. I don't believe that holds true, especially in product. It's not a generic role. You have to know what are the skills and competencies needed at every level, especially at a time when there is so much of re-leveling and down-leveling happening in the market. There are certain skills and competencies that are needed, the very specific skills that are needed. And so you have to learn those. And so that's what the Leadership Edge focuses. So yeah, that's a little bit about PM Dojo.
That's amazing. So I want to understand more about the leadership edge, right? So I at least the place where I'm in right now, I feel like that's a very difficult transition, especially from probably like a PM, senior PM to director levels and stuff. That's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what are the different leadership skills that you focus on, and what do you guys specifically do to coach people in that area?
So it's a really interesting question because I think every single PM that I've met, same with myself too, I think we get stuck at that level, right? I think a little bit is, I think one is to understand, I think, whether your company itself is ready for that different level of PM. I think we have lived in a number of years within the tech industry where it was a tenured based promotion almost. I know I get into trouble when I say that, but we really kind of did not recalibrate skills and competencies needed at different levels, because if you're having a senior PM, group PM, principal PM, they need to be doing different things. You need to either think differently, or you need to approach the problem differently, or you need to solve problems at different scale with different complexity in order to get into that level. But we kind of did not think about a lot of those ladders, right? So we just kind of had these different levels because that was one way to retain folks again. So I think when it comes to the skills, I think one is to really understand where you are, at what level you are, and then identify what are some of the skills and competencies that is keeping you stuck from that next level, right? So I think that is a very important assessment that happens. It's not a test. Like a lot of people think no one is going to take an exam, but it's kind of a reflection exercise. I might be asking folks, from their performance reviews, I might be asking folks to reflect a little bit on some 29 different competencies that I have across different levels that I've met. That more or less kind of, I think, fits a lot of different tech companies. Every company is different, but it kind of models really well. So we kind of start there because I think that is really important as a baseline to understand, because a lot of times I think we either overestimate our skills and a lot of times we underestimate our skills. So I think as a PM, it's really important to objectively assess where you are. And I think from there, it kind of really depends, right? I don't think I actually believe in leadership traits, because I think over the years, how should I say this? I feel like, I think we try to mimic, at least I tried to do that a lot in my early career, where I would see or hear a very respected product leader, and I would try to become like them. That's, I think, in psychology, it's called survival bias. But it doesn't work because the context under which they're operating is not my context. And so I cannot just copy someone's style and just become like them. I think this is also something that I think a lot of PMs struggle with, because they try to operate and work like someone else, right? And so I think for me, a lot of it comes down to, I think, situational awareness. Like, what is the context under which you're operating? How do you figure out what kind of leadership is needed? Leadership is a lot about the shades of gray. It's not about, are you a pragmatic leader or are you an inspiring leader? You could be both. Are you a leader who takes risk, or are you a leader who takes educated bets? You have to be somewhere in the spectrum, and depending on the context or the situation, you might have to go from one extreme to the other, right? And I think a lot of times, what got us here does not take us to that next place. So I think, when I'm coaching them, I'm really trying to focus on what is needed in their context, especially if they're working one-on-one with me, because that allows us to be exploring that area and then figuring out, what does your leadership style look like? What is needed in the company for you to succeed? And then how do you position yourself? And then, of course, starting to work on skills from strategy, So I'll give you a very tangible example here. If you're working at a company that is pre-product market fit, the way you start thinking about product strategy is going to look very different than, let's say, if you're working in a very mature company and you're iteratively improving the product. So it doesn't matter if I start teaching you how to think about product strategy for a mature. You have to think about a 0 to 1 very differently, right? So I think this is where I kind of focus on. So whether it's strategy, whether it's execution, whether it is team topology, if you are at a level where you're thinking about, managing team and developing team, how do you design your product org? How do you think about competency mapping and then map it around product road mapping? How do you deal with politics? Let's just face it, it's always there. How do you, if you are a people manager, how do you actually really shift your work from being a builder of product to a builder of teams? That needs a very different type of skill. Or if you are within the IC path, then how do you start thinking about what made you successful as a senior PM? How should you be shifting the lens with which you need to look at the problems if you were, let's say, eyeing for a principal PM role? It's very different, right? So I think that's where we focus on from a coaching and a program standpoint for Leadership Edge.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think we keep hearing this a lot, right? A lot of people reach out to us saying, they're stuck in the staff or principal product manager levels, and it's not that easy to get to the next level. And people kind of are in the same for years and years together. And that's where you have to take a fresh perspective on and try to understand what those next level skills are and try to get to that spot. And I think it's as you said, right, varied by the stage of the product, the size of the company, and a lot of different things, variables go
a lot of different things. And and if I'm not saying every company is going to be open to, you want to become, let's say a director of product. I mean, we all want that growth in our career, right? I'm not going to tell you like, hey, you should really just focus on the work and not think about no, these things matter. I think we all are humans. It matters. So I'm not going to tell anyone that. But if you do want to become, but at some point, I think we should also realize when we outgrow what the company can offer us. And so at that point, how do you either have a conversation to make a business case for why you in a director of a product role can help the company achieve that next level of growth? That might be one strategy,
Yep.
right? Because maybe there is no director of product. That's how I got my first director of product. There was no director of product. And I had to build that business case and kind of really figure that out. And again, they were clueless as to why we even needed a director of product. And I had to build that case of what this role can achieve, not about me, but what this role can achieve for the company. Or you have to kind of part ways and be like, okay, I think I've outgrown what the company can offer me. And it's a hard realization to have, but it's an important realization to have. And so how should you then be planning your exit and figuring out where you can be that next level, but also understand that sometimes you may find people who are in director role, but they're really doing a senior PM job. So I think that is something really important to understand in product, that titles don't necessarily correlate to the actual work in a lot of different companies.
Yeah, that's right. And especially, right, like in product title, I think is the most misunderstood, right? So a lot of people have product titles, do a lot of different stuff. So, and we keep joking around in the podcast saying that a lot of times. Yeah.
100%, 100%.
One other thing, I want to switch gears and maybe focus on a specific topic, right? Which I understand but don't understand as well a lot, right? So I see your LinkedIn page and you talk a lot about women in product and, challenges, balancing motherhood, ambition, and all of these things, and leadership, right? So, and I think this comes, people are wired differently, like men and women, right? Like the women have different set of challenges they have to overcome. The same thing with men, right? But specifically, you have experienced bringing or talking to these people, like could you maybe share some insights where how would what are some of these challenges, and how do people overcome these? This can help a lot of people,
Yeah.
women who are trying to get into product by looking
Yeah.
at this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that question. And I like the fact that you said that men are wired differently and women are wired differently, because that is a fact. The funny joke is many, many years ago when my husband and I we were dating, we're not married. I don't remember when this book came out, but you might remember, or maybe you don't. It was Women Are from Venus and Men Are from Mars.
Yes.
And every time my boyfriend, who's now my husband, we would have an argument, he would basically bring up that book to justify his behavior, because he's like, well, I'm wired differently. And I got so mad that I literally ripped off that book, and I threw it. But he taped it, and we still have that book after all these years. So yes, we are wired differently. It's got nothing related with your question, but I think I just kind of remembered that. Um, I think I think there are some inherent challenges when it comes to women in product leadership. So I'm not talking about women getting into product. This is specifically when I'm talking about women navigating the career path and leadership. So there is a lot of data already out there. And again, I'm not making this up, but there is this data about certain things that happen. There is the first concept or the first observation that we see is that there is a term called broken rung. Essentially, what it means is that it is extremely, extremely difficult for women to make that first jump into the manager position. It is hard for anyone. It is hard for all of us. It's hard for men as well. But women face that a little bit more. Now, this can happen for a lot of different reasons. I'll give you one simple example that happened with me. There are certain expectations people have in workforce about how women should behave and act and work or think. It's just ingrained across the world. Yes, culture plays a big part, but across the world it is, right? We are all taught as little girls to behave, to be nice, to be polite, to not speak up, not to take risks. This is how you see even in the parks, right? Girls are going to be playing games that don't need you to jump from one place to the other, and little boys are going to be playing that. I think it's just ingrained in how boys are raised and how girls are raised. I'm making a stereotype here about averages. I'm drawing averages here. So this kind of plays out. So the broken rung is, it's very, very hard for women to get that first manager position. And the example that I was talking about, we were having many years ago, we were having, I think, a potluck lunch or something. I was pretty senior in my role. We were pretty much 50-50 from a diversity standpoint, men versus women. Sure enough, the C-suite had all men, but that's just tech, right? It's got nothing to do. But as the potluck announcement came, it was just a very simple thing that happened, but I still remember this after all these years. The CEO and the HR, who was a woman, looked at me and said, Bosky, can you and your friends organize the potluck? And I'm like, why? I didn't say why, but why? Why should I organize the potluck? And what do you mean by me and my friends? Right? So there is this thing that happens a lot where you will see women who either are given some of these non-promotable tasks. I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing it, right? It's teamwork, but it shouldn't be expected by default that just because you're a woman, you tend to maybe be more of a nurturer just biologically, by DNA. You cannot change that. So you should do the same kind of work at work as well, right? And so years later, when I sat in the C-suite, the same thing happened. We were having a potluck. I was the only woman in the C-suite. Rest, all of my peers were men. We decided to have a big potluck to celebrate this huge mega launch. And the CEO kind of looked at me and said, Bosky, I think you should own this. And I just remember that it was such a trigger for me, but I knew better this time around. And I said, I have a great idea. We shouldn't do potluck. We should actually do a barbecue. And guess what happened?
Yeah.
The women didn't, the men did. And
Yeah.
so, I think so that is the broken rung or symptoms of it that happens. But sometimes you just, you don't have to fight, but sometimes you can start making these little changes, I think, within your company setting. Like I cannot change the whole systemic bias that we have in the society and in the world. But yeah, we had a fantastic barbecue where the men took the charge of everything. And, it was like a team effort, right? The women clean, we brought in the food, we organized games, but the men were in charge of the cooking, cleaning, and organizing the fun part. But I think the other phenomena that happens is there's also data, and I think this thing came from Lean In and McKinsey recently, and that is for every 100 men that are promoted, only 85 women are promoted. And I think for women of color, that becomes even less. So all of this data is there. Now, why does this happen? There are certain leadership traits that we expect to work in our workplace. When we think of leadership, we're thinking of things like you have to be assertive, you have to be strong, you have to say things the way they are. But if a woman starts doing this, for a large extent, for many women, they simply get canceled and they simply basically get called the B word, right? I've been called that many times. So there is the perception that you have to be soft and nurturing. So you cannot be that. And anytime women start acting out as a leader or act out, or I shouldn't say acting out. So we should cut that piece out when you edit. But when they try to take the place of being a leader, and they start really behaving like a leader and demonstrating a lot of those traits that are accepted, then they start getting called names because we have different perceptions of what leadership should look like from a man and from a woman. So I think these are a lot of the things that just happen in the workplace. Now, I also don't believe that you can suddenly just change everything. I think, at some point it'll become extremely exhausting. I think I naively believed that I had to change myself in order to talk like a man and be like a man in the workplace if I needed to move up in the leadership. That was a big mistake because it got so exhausting at the end that I couldn't function because I was constantly in this conflict. And being as an introvert, it just adds that extra layer of stress and overwhelm, I think, once work ended. So I think you still have to lead in your own way that works for the company, but you also feel happy and you shouldn't kind of get exhausted and empty. Your fuel tank shouldn't get empty. But at the same time, I think you need to be able to figure out how should you be leading? How should you figure out how you should lead and what's going to work for you and what's going to work for the company? So does that answer the question that you were asking?
Yeah.
I want to add on to that, right? So I definitely see similar things at like all the workplaces that I've been as well, right? And I might have unintentionally done some of these things too, but when I think back about it, right, everyone learns through certain things. So can you talk about like what are probably some of the leadership principles or the strategies that you have learned and then grown over a period of time?
One of the things that I think changed in a big way in my headspace was early in my career, I put in a lot of focus on doing a really good job, like everyone, but doing it in such a way that I was not just another PM in the company, I was the best PM. And I don't know why this thing was there. Maybe it was just a competitive nature. And so what it did, it really helped me being noticed. It saved me from lots of layoffs as well. It created opportunities where I was known as the PM who could be given the messiest problems in the company, which no one wanted to touch, but I could do it, which I think is a really good perception to have in a company. And so when, it made me feel really bad when a huge layoff happened during financial crisis and I was actually given an international secondment in Bermuda. So, I mean, there were opportunities that came because of the way I worked. However, it came at a cost. The cost was, and I think this is where the learning comes in my pursuit to be really good and strong in my role, I had to make sure that I could execute really well and get my hands dirty. Like I wasn't a very ivory tower, hands-off PM. I used to get my hands dirty. And so as I started climbing in my leadership role, there was this one initiative. It was a very high visible, very politically charged initiative. We had tried to work on this like 3-4 times, and every single time it had failed. And it finally came to me. And so I think the stakes were really high, and I had to live up to that perception that I had built in the company. And I took that perception a little bit too seriously. And so what I learned from that was that because I had always been so hands-on, even in this role, I was very hands-on, but this time the stuff was different. I wasn't an individual PM. I actually had a team of PMs. But I continued to be that hands-on doer and ultimately ended up becoming a blocker for a lot of decisions, right? And so what ended up happening was that the project failed. It was a massive failure, probably bigger than the earlier attempts. Everyone was really, really, I think they really got exhausted. I think no one wanted to work with me. And so a lot of the things that I worked for the first 10, 12 years of my career kind of just came crashing in my face because I was like, this can't be happening. What made me successful or what worked for me in the past now has suddenly become my, that's not going to help me get to the next level. So I think for me, that was like a big realization from a leadership that you need to let go. And it takes a lot of power to learn how to let go, which also means that I had to learn how to trust, which also meant that I had to be trustworthy as a leader. So I think it was kind of very interesting about how I started approaching a lot of things, how I would bring in my PMs and get them involved on some of the higher level strategy work, even though they didn't have to work on strategy, or how did I talk about my own anxiety or about how I manage my own psychology? Because I think we all talk about, oh yeah, everything's great. And if you do X, Y, Z, like there is a formula for everything that's going to get you out of the shittiest of situations. But it doesn't happen like this. Like there are some times that you just are like, geez, I lost that fight. There's just no way. And I think your team needs to hear that, because otherwise they're chasing something that seems like perfect, but in reality it is not. And so I think it really changed how I started thinking about leading a team and leading my team into more of a human-based approach and thinking of them as people and humans, and not kind of thinking as like, hey, I've got resources in my disposal that I can just kind of play with. It's not a chess game that I'm playing, right?
As you continue to grow, right, it's not easy to like stick to a certain principle. As you continue to grow and evolve, you'll have to like change based on company, based on initiatives, based on people, like so many other
You
factors.
evolve as well, right? We all change, right?
Just curious, Rez, you're talking about strategy and how different people do strategy at different levels, right? So just curious, right? You helped a lot of leaders in companies like Meta, Netflix, and so on, so forth. So what are the most critical factors of driving innovation within product teams, right? Could you walk us through that?
So you're not gonna like if I say it depends, because I hate giving that answer. But I think it starts with understanding, defining, and I don't like this word aligning, but what does innovation mean for that company? I think it's really important to understand, because it's become one of those cliche words, especially in this current market landscape, because every company is being forced to rethink how they need to, I think, survive for many companies right now. Yeah, right. How they need to stay ahead of the curve. And so you have to change things, right? So what does innovation mean? Does innovation mean building something completely new? Does innovation mean changing how you work and collaborate, right? Does innovation mean how you're going to maybe think about big, mature products, and how you need to think about maybe improving some of the existing product lines? So what does innovation mean at your company? I think that is really important to understand first, and make sure that at least the key stakeholders and you are in agreement, because as a PM, you cannot be on a different island thinking about what innovation means when the rest of the stakeholders are thinking something totally different, right? And I think once you understand that, I think it's also very important to make sure that everyone is on the same page with, why do we need to change the status quo? I think I'm sure you guys have seen that too, where I think we all assume that, of course, we need to do something because it kind of makes sense. We're losing customers and, we're not making enough money. And those are facts of any business. So what about your business? And what is going on in your company right now that makes a lot of sense as to why we may need to do things differently. I was brought in as a director of product of one company, and very soon, there was a lot of pressure to completely I don't like this word, or maybe it isn't even an English word, but we had to modernize our platform. It had accumulated enough tech debt, and there was no refactoring or any re-architecture done for like 20 plus years. And anything that we wanted to do within the product, it would just take forever, like the typical problems that happen, the challenges that happen with, an archaic kind of a platform. And so, we decided to kind of focus and have a dual strategy where we're going to focus on a little bit of incremental improvements where we can, but at the same time, we're going to be really figuring out what were some of the riskiest bits that we needed to start to modernize from a technical architecture standpoint. When I proposed that strategy, of course, it got shut down. And no one could tell me in the exact room as to why, and in my conversations one-on-one with the CEO, I wasn't just getting, like, there was lip service happening, but it didn't justify, like, I could not get a solid enough answer as to why the strategy isn't going to work. So I said, okay, fine, then what would you prefer? Like, if this is not, and no one wanted to touch tech debt. Everything was, I'm like, okay, but why? Like, how do you see this? Like, a lot of the questions that I was asking was really not getting the answers that would help me justify one route versus the other. It took me several coffees, one lunch, maybe multiple dinners, to really understand that the CEO was really thinking of retiring and actually selling the company. And in order to sell the company, we couldn't focus on spending a lot of effort and money on stuff that is not going to help him increase the selling price of the company. And so that's why the tech debt was really not a feasible option, but he obviously couldn't tell that. But this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, it's when you're thinking about strategy, we all talk about how you need to understand the context of the business. But a lot of the times what gets told is lip service. You really have to dig deep and understand, and so how do you ask those questions? How do you really infer? How do you build that relationship where these things even come up? And then, because no one's going to tell you this if you don't have that relationship, right? So I think it's really important to understand those in the context, because once I understood that that is what the CEO was after, I got it as to why some of those strategy ideas were not getting approved by him, and how I needed to think about ensuring that he was successful. In turn, the company was successful, and then the rest of us can be successful, right? I couldn't just have that ego and say, well, this is what I want you to do, and I need to completely overhaul the whole product, and that will be success to me. Sure, that would be success to me, but that would be disaster for the company. The company would not have survived, right? So I think it's really important to understand the meaning behind what people say, so that you're able to connect innovation with the context of the business, what the business is really trying to do, really have that strong relationship with the CEO. And then after that, then think about, like, okay, what does it mean? If you are a large big tech company, are you, like, what is the challenge, right? Are you struggling because maybe there are too many competitors that are coming and slowly it's eroding your new user acquisition? Or are you concerned that you're having lots of customers or users that you're losing? Are you finding that people are coming in, but maybe they're not engaged in your platform? Each of these different types of problems within the product needs a different kind of strategy, right? And then you can think about, how do we solve these problems? How do we think about a roadmap? How do we think about experiments that is going to really give us enough market signals before we end up spending a whole bunch of effort in building something? These are all, like, common sense stuff. But I think some of the legwork that needs to be done, I think needs to be kind of really thought about differently. And I think when I'm thinking about innovation strategy, a lot of it is, I think, learning how to ask the right questions so that you can get the signals. I think a lot of people think innovation, let me think about the process of innovation. How will ideas come? How do we triage ideas? How do we figure out which ideas are going to get prioritized? That's the process bit. But I think first you need to, spend some time to know what questions to ask. Then you can figure out the process. Then you can figure out, how you're going to visualize the strategy. Because again, that is not as important as getting the answers to the questions. Then you can format it however way you want that is going to be consumable by the audience. Right?
Awesome. So essentially, you're saying that maybe the first initial piece is to understand the why, dig deeper, right? Get into the crux and the root cause of why you're doing it, and then maybe ask more and more questions so that you can get to that spot where you have an innovation or a strategy to get to wherever you want to get to, right? Essentially.
No, this is great, Bosky. Yeah, thank you so much for talking through all of these details and bearing with all of the questions that we had.
Thank you for inviting me, Fanny and Sid. This was fun.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.